I arrived at the lighthouse on a Monday morning with everything I owned crammed into 2 duffel bags. The boat ride out had taken 40 minutes through choppy gray water, 3 miles off the Oregon coast, where the continental shelf dropped away into something deeper. Orion Fisher ran the ferry, if you could call a 30-foot workboat with peeling paint a ferry. He'd loaded my bags without comment, nodded toward the bench bolted to the deck, and started the engine before I'd finished zipping my jacket. The facility rose out of the sea ahead of us, white tower against white sky, everything the same washed-out color except for the dark rocks at its base. Waves broke against the foundation in irregular rhythms. No beach, no gradual approach, just vertical stone and concrete punching up through the surface. I'd seen pictures during the interview process. Video call, actually, with someone named Hazel Espinoza, who'd explained the position through a connection that kept pixelating. The images hadn't prepared me for how small it looked, how far from anything else. "Weather's turning," Orion said. First words he'd spoken since we'd left the dock. I looked back toward the mainland. Couldn't see it anymore. Just variations of gray in every direction, sky bleeding into water without a clear horizon line. "Storm coming?" "Always a storm coming." He adjusted course, angling toward the eastern side of the lighthouse where a concrete platform jutted out above the water line. "You get used to it." I didn't plan to be here long enough to get used to anything. 6 months, maybe 8. Long enough to rebuild my savings account after Margaret's lawyers had finished with it. Long enough to figure out what came next. The divorce had finalized 2 months ago. 63 days, if I was counting. Which I wasn't, mostly. Orion cut the engine and let momentum carry us toward the platform. Metal ladder bolted to the concrete, green with algae below the waterline. He moved around the deck with the efficiency of someone who'd made this trip 1,000 times, tying off lines, positioning fenders. Didn't ask for help. Didn't seem to want conversation. Suited me fine. "Supplies go up first," he said, hauling a plastic crate from the hold. "Then your gear. Then you." The crate held basics. Canned goods, bottled water, batteries, toilet paper. Industrial quantities of instant coffee. He clipped it to a pulley system I hadn't noticed, rope running up the tower to a boom arm 30 feet above us. Started hauling hand over hand. I watched the crate rise. Tried not to think about how Margaret had looked when she'd signed the papers, pen moving across the document with quick, decisive strokes. Tried not to remember the apartment we'd shared, now hers alone, my name removed from the lease along with everything else. "You'll do that yourself going forward," Orion said, lowering the empty hook. "Supply runs every 2 weeks, weather permitting." Understood. My duffel bags went up next. Everything I'd kept after the division of assets. Clothes, laptop, external hard drives with 7 years of research data, noise-canceling headphones I'd bought for the plane rides to conferences I wouldn't be attending anymore. The second bag held books, toiletries, medications I didn't take consistently enough. Orion gestured toward the ladder. The metal rungs were slick under my palms, cold even through my gloves. I focused on the climbing. Hand, foot, hand, foot. Didn't look down at the boat or the water churning against the rocks. Wind pushed at me sideways, stronger the higher I climbed. The platform at the top was maybe 8 feet square, concrete weathered to rough gray. A steel door set into the tower base, painted red once but faded now to rust orange. Orion came up behind me, breathing steady despite the climb. He pulled a key ring from his pocket, selected one without hesitation, and unlocked the door. "Main level's living quarters," he said, stepping inside. "Kitchen, bathroom, bunk, equipment's upstairs." The interior smelled like salt and mildew and something else underneath. Electrical ozone, maybe. Old coffee. The main room held basic furniture, narrow bed against one wall, kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, table with 2 chairs, metal shelving stocked with more supplies, single window facing east, thick glass in a steel frame, everything bolted down or built in. Orion set my bags beside the bed, moved to the shelving and pulled down a binder, pages warped from humidity. Procedures, he said, dropping it on the table. Shift schedules, equipment protocols, emergency contacts, satellite phones in the charging dock. He pointed to a device mounted on the wall, handset like something from the 90s. Weather radio next to it. You get storm warnings. You secure everything and stay inside. What about evacuation? If it's bad enough to evacuate, I can't get the boat out here anyway. He shrugged. Towers survived worse than anything you'll see. Just ride it out. Comforting. He walked me through the basics without unnecessary explanation. Water came from a desalination unit in the basement, checked weekly. Power from solar panels and a backup generator. Diesel fuel stored in a reinforced tank. Waste system I didn't want to think about too carefully. Everything designed for minimal maintenance, maximum isolation. Your actual job's upstairs, Orion said, moving toward a spiral staircase in the corner. You coming? The stairs were steel, riveted construction, narrow enough that my shoulders nearly brushed both sides. They curved up through the tower's center, passing a second level. Storage looked like boxes and equipment cases before reaching the top floor. The equipment room filled the entire level beneath the light chamber. Banks of recording devices lined 3 walls, rack-mounted units with indicator lights and digital displays. Cables ran everywhere, bundled and labeled. A desk faced the main console, ergonomic chair that seemed absurdly out of place, professional-grade headphones hanging from a hook. Hydrophones are positioned along the shelf, Orion said, pointing to a map tacked to the wall. Red dots marked locations extending west into deeper water. They're recording constantly. Your job's to monitor the live feed during your shift, flag anything unusual. Unusual how? That's what the training materials cover. He gestured to another binder on the desk, this one newer. Biological sounds versus mechanical. Migration patterns, depth indicators. You log everything in the system. Tag files for the researchers to review. I sat in the chair, pulled on the headphones. Static washed through, low-level background noise. Underneath it, something rhythmic. Creaking, maybe. Groaning. That's normal, Orion said. Ice movement, tectonic settling, whale songs from 100 miles away. You'll learn to filter it. I adjusted the volume. The sounds resolved into distinct layers. High-frequency clicks, deep bass pulses, occasional metallic scraping. My background was in data analysis, pattern recognition in large data sets. This wasn't so different, just audio instead of numbers. 8-hour shifts, Orion continued. You pick the schedule, just maintain consistency. Satellite uplink transmits your logs automatically. Someone named Espinoza reviews them. Hazel Espinoza. My supposed supervisor. We'd only spoken once during the interview. She'd asked basic questions about my experience, explained the pay structure, exceptional, exactly as advertised, and sent the contract via email. I'd signed it the same day Margaret's lawyer had sent the final settlement agreement. Probably should have read both more carefully. Questions? Orion asked. When's the next supply run? 2 weeks. I'll radio ahead, see if you need anything specific. He moved toward the stairs. You're set otherwise? I think so. Satellite phone works anywhere in the tower. Emergency services, mainland contact, numbers in the binder. He paused at the top of the stairs. Gets quiet out here. Some people don't adjust. Quiet's what I need. He nodded. Didn't look convinced. I'll see myself out. His footsteps echoed down the spiral stairs. I heard the main door open and close, the clang of his boots on the exterior ladder. Sat there in the chair, headphones still on, listening to the ocean floor creak and settle. The boat engine started, faded, disappeared into the ambient noise. I was alone. Pulled off the headphones, stood and walked to the window. Narrow slit in the tower wall, thick glass like downstairs. The boat was already distant, white wake spreading behind it. Gray water in every direction. No other vessels, no birds, just waves and sky and the sound of wind against stone. My phone had no signal. Expected that. I'd told Margaret's lawyer where I'd be, left forwarding information for anything urgent. Told my parents I was taking a research position on the coast, which was technically true. Hadn't mentioned the isolation. Hadn't mentioned that I'd be 3 miles offshore with nothing but recording equipment and my own thoughts. Seemed like exactly what I needed. Space to think, time to process, work that required attention, but not emotional investment. I went back downstairs, unpacked my bags, putting clothes in the metal dresser beside the bed, setting up my laptop on the table. The binder Orion had left sat there, pages dense with procedures and protocols. I flipped it open. Acoustic monitoring guidelines, deep-sea hydrophone array shift requirements, 8 hours continuous monitoring per 24-hour period, logging protocols. All anomalous sounds must be tagged and categorized, emergency procedures. Contact mainland supervisor immediately for pattern classifications. I turned the page. Found a list of sound categories: biological, geological, anthropogenic, weather-related. And at the bottom, separate section, pattern events. No definition. Just a note. See Supervisor Espinoza for classification criteria. I'd asked during my first check-in. Closed the binder. Looked around the room that would be my entire world for the next 6 months. Small, functional, utterly impersonal. Perfect. I made coffee from the instant supply, bitter and too hot, and carried it upstairs to the equipment room. Sat in the chair, put on the headphones, pulled up the logging software and started my first shift, listening to the deep ocean creak and groan while 3 miles of cold water separated me from everything I'd left behind. The sounds resolved into patterns, rhythmic, almost soothing. I began to log them one by one, settling into my new, isolated existence at the lighthouse station. The first week passed in a rhythm I hadn't expected to find comforting. Each shift ran 8 hours, and I settled into the pattern quickly. Put on the headphones at 0800, open the logging software. Listen. The underwater soundscape had layers. That's what struck me first. Not just individual noises, but textures. Currents moving against rock faces created low-frequency drones that vibrated through the equipment. Biological sounds came in pulses, clicks, whistles, groans. I'd done marine acoustic work before, back when Margaret and I were still sharing an apartment in Portland, but that had been data analysis, spreadsheets and waveform visualizations. This was different. Raw. Immediate. Monday through Wednesday blurred together. I documented whale songs, humpbacks mostly, their vocalizations rising and falling in patterns that felt almost conversational. The classification binder had spectrograms for reference, and I matched what I heard against the examples, tagging each occurrence with timestamps and estimated distance. The hydrophones picked up everything within a 5-mile radius, sometimes farther depending on water conditions. Cargo ships registered as distant rumbles, engines throbbing through the deep. I logged them under anthropogenic sources, noting bearing and approximate tonnage based on the acoustic signature. Smaller vessels, fishing boats probably, produced higher-pitched mechanical sounds, Propellers churning. Those came and went irregularly. Thursday brought geological activity. Not an earthquake. Nothing that dramatic. Just the ocean floor settling. Creaks and pops that reminded me of old houses cooling down at night, except these sounds came from tectonic plates adjusting against each other miles below the surface. I tagged them carefully, cross-referencing the classification guidelines. The binder had a whole section on seismic monitoring, procedures for escalation if anything exceeded certain thresholds. Nothing did. I ate meals between shifts, canned soup, crackers, instant coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard but kept me functional. The kitchenette had a 2-burner electric stove and a small refrigerator that hummed constantly, adding its own mechanical drone to the ambient noise of the tower. I'd brought protein bars and dried fruit, stuff that wouldn't spoil. The supplies Orion had loaded filled 2 full shelves, enough for a month, maybe longer if I rationed. Sleep came easier than it had in months. Back in Portland, I'd spent nights staring at the ceiling of my studio apartment, listening to traffic and distant sirens, thinking about the divorce papers and Margaret's voice when she'd said she couldn't do this anymore. Here, the only sounds were wind against the tower and waves hitting rock. White noise. Natural. It let my brain stop running in circles. The isolation felt different than I'd anticipated. Not oppressive. Clarifying, maybe. No one asking questions. No one expecting me to explain myself or pretend I was handling things better than I was. Just me and the equipment and the ocean. Hazel called every day at noon. Exactly noon. I could set my watch by it if I'd worn one. The satellite phone would ring, that harsh electronic chirp cutting through whatever I was doing, and I'd answer on the 2nd or 3rd ring. Her voice came through layered with static, digital artifacts that chopped her words into fragments before reassembling them half a second later. "Good afternoon, Rodney. How are the logs looking today?" "Professional. Pleasant." She always started the same way. Monday's call lasted maybe 10 minutes. I walked her through the morning's recordings. 3 distinct humpback vocalizations, 1 cargo vessel passing southwest at approximately 8 miles out, baseline geological activity within normal parameters. She asked clarifying questions, wanted timestamps for the whale songs, asked if I'd noted any calf vocalizations among them. I hadn't heard any. Told her so. She made a sound that might have been acknowledgement, hard to tell through the static. "Everything sounds appropriate," she said. "You're doing solid work. Keep monitoring those biological patterns. Migration season starting, so we should see increased activity over the next few weeks." Tuesday's call went similarly. I reported 2 separate whale pods, distinguished by vocal patterns and directional bearings. She seemed pleased, asked about equipment function, whether the hydrophones were picking up any interference or degraded signal quality. They weren't. Everything ran clean. Wednesday, she asked about my adjustment to the facility. "Some people struggle with the isolation," she said. "You managing all right?" "Fine," I told her. "Actually sleeping better than I have in a while." "Good, that's good. The routine helps, I think. Gives structure." She wasn't wrong. The predictability felt stabilizing. Wake up. Monitor. Log. Eat. Sleep. Repeat. No variables to account for. No unexpected complications. Thursday's call came right as I was finishing lunch. Crackers with peanut butter. Apple slices from a can. I wiped my hands on my pants before picking up. "Afternoon. Got some interesting geological activity this morning," I said. "Nothing concerning, but more pronounced than the previous days. Logged it around 09:45. Static crackled. Her voice cut in and out. "Reviewed the preliminary data. Normal range. Good documentation." "You're breaking up," I said. The connection cleared slightly. "I said your documentation looks thorough. The geological sounds are expected. There's a fault line about 12 miles northeast. It shifts periodically. I hadn't known that. The briefing materials hadn't mentioned fault lines, but then again, I hadn't read every page of the binder yet. Plenty of technical appendices I'd skipped. Anything I should watch for? I asked. Just continue standard monitoring. If you hear anything that doesn't match the classification examples, note it, and we'll discuss during the next check-in. Understood. Friday's call felt almost routine. I gave her the daily summary. More whale activity, 2 fishing vessels passing within hydrophone range, continued low-level geological sounds. She confirmed receipt of the uploaded log files, mentioned the data looked consistent and well-organized. You're settling in well, she said. I was concerned the first week might be rough, but you've adapted quickly. Helps that the work's straightforward, I said, and quiet. Quiet's what you wanted, right? That's what you mentioned in your application interview. I'd forgotten I'd said that. Probably had, though. Margaret had accused me of running away when I'd told her about taking this job. Maybe she'd been right. Didn't make it the wrong choice. Yeah, I said. Quiet's good. By the end of the week, I'd found a rhythm that felt sustainable. The monitoring shifts stopped feeling like work and started feeling like observation, maybe. Meditation with a purpose. I'd sit in the equipment room with the headphones on, eyes half closed, listening to the layered soundscape. Began to recognize individual whales by their vocal signatures. One humpback had a particularly deep, resonant call that stood out from the others. Tagged it as Specimen Alpha in my logs, gave Hazel the designation during Friday's call. She approved the tracking approach. The solitude I'd been seeking after the divorce had materialized exactly as I'd hoped. No one knocking on my door. No one calling except Hazel at noon. No expectations beyond the work itself. I'd spent 6 months in Portland after Margaret moved out, surrounded by people and noise and constant reminders of everything that had fallen apart. Here, none of that existed, just water and rock and the mechanical hum of equipment. I appreciated it more than I'd anticipated. The ocean sounds became familiar, comforting even. Predictable patterns I could map and understand. Nothing unusual disrupted the routine. Nothing unexpected broke through the steady rhythm of marine acoustic monitoring. It felt manageable, sustainable. I should have known better. The 8th night started the same as the others. I settled into the equipment room at midnight, headphones on, logging software open, coffee steaming in the chipped mug I'd claimed as mine. The underwater soundscape filled my ears, the usual layered symphony of groaning currents, distant whale calls, the metallic ping of a trawler somewhere beyond the monitoring radius. I'd gotten comfortable with the routine, knew what belonged and what didn't. 2:47 in the morning, that changed. The sound came through hydrophone 7, the one positioned roughly 4 miles southeast, low frequency, subsonic almost, vibrating through the headphones in a way that made my molars ache. I straightened in the chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard where I'd been logging a passing pod of dolphins. The sound didn't match any classification in the binder. Wasn't biological, no organic rhythm to it, no breathing pattern or vocalization structure. Wasn't geological either. Too deliberate. Too shaped. I pulled the headphones off. Checked the equipment readouts on the main console. All green. No errors, no warnings. Signal strength normal across all 12 hydrophones. I tapped the monitor displaying hydrophone 7's waveform. The pattern looked clean, no distortion, that would indicate hardware failure or electromagnetic interference. Put the headphones back on. The sound was still there, continuous now, building in volume. I adjusted the frequency filters, isolating the signal from the ambient noise. That's when the structure became clear. Not random, not natural. It had cadence, rhythm, the kind of pattern that suggested words, human speech, but wrong. Backwards, maybe, or inverted somehow. I couldn't make out individual syllables, couldn't reverse engineer meaning, but the shape of it was unmistakable. Someone speaking, the audio distorted beyond recognition but retaining that fundamental quality that separated language from mere sound. My hand shook slightly as I opened a new entry in the logging software. Classified it under Unidentified Requires Supervisor Review. Time-stamped it. Noted the hydrophone location and the frequency range. In the description field, I typed, possible anthropogenic audio resembling human vocalization. Origin unknown. No surface vessels detected in monitoring radius. The sound continued for another 6 minutes, then stopped abruptly, cut off mid-pattern, leaving only the ambient ocean noise in its wake. I sat there for another 20 minutes, monitoring hydrophone 7 and the surrounding array. Nothing. Just whales and water, and the distant groan of the continental shelf doing what it always did. Noon couldn't come fast enough. When the satellite phone rang at exactly 1200 hours, I had the logged entry pulled up on my laptop, ready to reference timestamps and frequencies. "Good afternoon, Rodney." Hazel's voice carried the usual digital static, the connection compressing her words into something tinny and remote. "How are conditions today?" "Fine, clear weather. Equipment's running normally." I paused. "I logged an anomaly last night, 2:47 a.m., hydrophone 7. A brief silence. Not unusual, the satellite delay created natural gaps in conversation. "What kind of anomaly?" "Low-frequency audio. Subsonic range, but structured. It sounded like it resembled human speech. Played backwards, maybe. I couldn't identify it using any of the classification protocols." "Duration?" 6 minutes, 14 seconds. "And you've verified equipment function?" "Everything checked out. No errors, no signal degradation. I reviewed the recording 3 times. It's there." Another pause, longer this time. I heard what might have been papers rustling on her end, or just interference. "Most likely electromagnetic interference," Hazel said. Her tone remained professional, untroubled. "Fishing vessels sometimes carry radio equipment that creates unusual acoustic signatures when signal bleeds into the hydrophone array. The backward speech effect is characteristic of compressed radio transmission interacting with underwater monitoring equipment." I frowned. There were no vessels in the monitoring radius. I checked the surface traffic logs. "Beyond the radius, then." EM interference can travel considerable distances through water, especially in the frequency range you described. "I'll review the uploaded data, but I'm confident it's equipment-related. Note it in your daily log and continue standard monitoring." Something in her dismissal bothered me. Too quick, too certain. But she was the supervisor. She'd reviewed thousands of hours of this data, knew the equipment's quirks better than I did after only 8 days. "Understood," I said. "Excellent work flagging it, though. That's exactly the kind of vigilance we need. Anything else to report?" "No. Just the usual biological and geological activity." "Very good. Keep up the thorough documentation." The line went dead. I sat at the table in the living quarters, laptop open, staring at the waveform of the anomaly. The pattern looked wrong for radio interference. Too organic, too deliberate. But Hazel had decades of experience with this equipment, this location. If she said it was EM bleed, it probably was. I closed the laptop, ate a can of chili standing at the kitchenette counter, not tasting it. Tried to sleep that afternoon before the next shift. But the sound kept replaying in my head. The cadence of it. The shape. The next night I was in the equipment room 15 minutes early, coffee already brewed, logging software open and ready. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything, just being thorough, professional. 247 came and went. Nothing. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. Hazel was right. Equipment glitch. One-time occurrence. Nothing to worry about. 251. Hydrophone 3 lit up. The sound came through clearer this time. Same low frequency, same subsonic rumble that made my teeth ache, but the structure was more defined. Still backwards, still distorted, but I could hear individual phonemes now. The rhythm of sentences, the pause between phrases. Someone speaking underwater, the audio reversed and stretched and wrong. I checked the location. Hydrophone 3 sat 15 miles north of Hydrophone 7. My fingers moved without conscious thought, opening the previous night's log entry, comparing coordinates. I pulled up the coastal map on the secondary monitor, plotting both positions. A straight line. Northward trajectory. The sound continued for 7 minutes this time, then cut off with the same abrupt finality. I didn't sleep that day. Lay in bed watching the ceiling, listening to the tower creak around me, thinking about movement and patterns and the distance between 2 points. Called Hazel at noon. Reported the second occurrence. She maintained it was equipment related. Suggested running a full diagnostic on the hydrophone array. I ran the diagnostic. Everything came back clean. Third night, 247 exactly. Hydrophone 1, another 15 miles north. Fourth night, same time. Hydrophone 11 continuing the trajectory. I stopped mentioning it in the daily calls. Hazel had made her position clear, and I didn't want to seem obsessive or unreliable, but I tracked it. Created a spreadsheet with timestamps, locations, durations. Plotted each occurrence on the map with colored pins I fashioned from torn pieces of the classification binder. The pattern was undeniable. Whatever was making that sound was moving steadily northward along the coast, appearing on a different hydrophone each night at exactly 2:47 in the morning. The progression was geometric, precise. Each new position fell perfectly along the projected line. I calculated the trajectory forward. In 6 days, it would reach the lighthouse. My hands were shaking again as I marked the final position on the map. The colored pin sat directly over the tower's location, 3 miles offshore, exactly where I was sitting. Outside, the wind picked up. The tower groaned. Waves crashed against the rocks below with a rhythm that sounded almost like speech. I put the headphones back on and listened to the ocean, waiting for 247 to arrive again. I called Hazel at noon on the 5th day, before the pattern reached my position, before I understood what I was listening to. She answered on the second ring. Same digital static, same professional tone. Rodney, how's the monitoring going? I need to discuss the recurring anomaly. I had my notes spread across the table. 5 nights of timestamps, coordinates, frequency ranges. The map with its colored pins forming a straight line pointing directly at the lighthouse. It's appeared every night at 2:47 a.m., moving northward in 15-mile intervals. The progression is geometric and consistent. This isn't random interference. Silence. Not the static kind. The deliberate kind. We discussed this, Hazel said. Her voice had changed. Sharper edges. EM interference from distant vessels. You ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. The diagnostics confirmed the equipment's functioning properly. That's not the same as explaining the source. I kept my tone measured. Factual. The pattern suggests intentional movement along a specific trajectory. Rodney. She cut me off. Your job is standard marine acoustic documentation. Biological sounds. Geological activity. Anthropogenic noise from identifiable sources. That's the scope of your work here. I looked at the map, at the pins marking each night's position, at the empty space where tomorrow's pin would go. I understand the scope, but this falls outside standard classifications. The procedures binder includes a category for pattern events requiring supervisor consultation. I'm consulted. I've reviewed your logs. Her irritation came through clearly despite the static. What you're experiencing is environmental interference amplified by your isolation. It happens. People start seeing patterns where there aren't any, hearing things that aren't there. My hand tightened on the phone. I'm not imagining this. The waveforms are documented, time-stamped. The progression is measurable. Focus on your assigned work. Her words came clipped now. Professional courtesy stripped away. Log the whales, track the vessels, document geological activity within established parameters. Stop fixating on phantom patterns. Are we clear? I stared at the map, at the lighthouse position marked with a red circle. Clear. Good. I'll check in tomorrow. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone. Outside, the waves hit the rocks with their steady rhythm. Inside, the tower creaked and settled. Normal sounds, documented sounds, sounds that fit within established parameters. I set the phone down and looked at my notes again. Hazel wanted me to stop, wanted me to focus on standard documentation and ignore everything else, wanted me to pretend I hadn't noticed the pattern moving closer every night. I opened my laptop instead. The audio software took 3 hours to download over the satellite connection. Professional-grade spectral analysis tools, the kind I'd used during my graduate research. Waveform editing, frequency isolation, noise reduction and filtering capabilities that went far beyond the basic logging software the facility provided. I worked through dinner, forgot to eat, made coffee and let it go cold. The procedures binder sat closed on the shelf. Standard marine acoustic documentation. My assigned scope. I opened the first recording instead. Hydrophone 7, 5 nights ago, 2:47 a.m. The waveform appeared on screen, low-frequency pulses beneath the normal ocean noise. I isolated the anomaly, filtered out the background static, adjusted the frequency range to bring the subsonic elements into audible range. Then I reversed it. The sound that emerged made my hands go still on the keyboard. Voices. Not one voice. Dozens of them. Layered and overlapping, whispering in a cascade that rose and fell with rhythmic cadence. I'd known, some part of me had recognized the speech patterns from the first night, but hearing it confirmed sent something cold through my chest. I played it again, adjusted the filters, isolated individual frequency bands to separate the layers. Most remained unintelligible. Fragments of words buried beneath other fragments. Consonants without vowels. Syllables that dissolved into static before completing. But pieces emerged. Enough to confirm what I was hearing. I started a new document. Began transcribing. The first clear fragment came at timestamp 2 minutes 14 seconds. 42.73 north. Coordinates. Geographic coordinates. I kept listening, kept filtering. The voices continued their overlapping whisper, and more fragments surfaced through the noise. August 1968. A date, decades old. 117 west. More coordinates. March 2003. Another date, more recent but still years past. I worked through the night, through the next day, forgot about my monitoring shift, forgot about the noon call I missed, forgot about everything except the voices and what they were saying. Each recording yielded more fragments, coordinates and dates scattered through the whispers, no apparent pattern to their order, some from the 1960s, others from the 80s, A few from the early 2000s, all maritime coordinates, all Pacific Northwest waters. Then the names started appearing. I almost missed the first one. Had to replay the section 3 times before I isolated it clearly enough to understand. Pacific Dawn. I stopped the playback, stared at the transcription. Pacific Dawn. Not a common phrase, not a description. A name, the kind of name you'd give a vessel. I kept working, kept filtering and isolating and transcribing. Stella Marie. Another name. Definitely a boat name this time. The rhythm and cadence matched maritime naming conventions. Northern Cross. Harvest Moon. 4 names. 4 vessels, whispered among the coordinates and dates in voices that shouldn't exist 4 miles underwater. I sat back from the laptop. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. The window showed late afternoon light, but I couldn't remember when I'd last slept. The names bothered me, more than the coordinates, more than the dates, more than the fact that I was hearing human voices in recordings taken from hydrophones monitoring empty ocean. Pacific Dawn, Stella Marie, Northern Cross, Harvest Moon. I opened a new browser window, started searching. The satellite connection crawled. Each search took minutes to load, but the results came through eventually. Pacific Dawn, fishing vessel lost off the Oregon coast, August 1968. All hands. My hands went still on the keyboard. Stella Marie, cargo ship vanished en route to Seattle, March 2003. No wreckage found. Northern Cross, research vessel disappeared, October 1974. Coast Guard search called off after 2 weeks. Harvest Moon. Commercial trawler, missing since December 1991. Presumed sunk. I pushed back from the table, stood up, walked to the window. The ocean stretched gray and empty to the horizon. Same view I'd seen every day since arriving. Same waves. Same sky. Same isolation. But something was moving through that water. Something that carried the voices of lost vessels and whispered their names in overlapping layers. Something that had been traveling northward for 6 nights, 15 miles closer each time. Something that would reach the lighthouse tonight. I looked at the clock. 6:32 p.m. 8 hours and 15 minutes until 2:47 a.m. I should have eaten, should have slept, should have called Hazel back and reported what I'd found. Instead, I returned to the laptop, opened the most recent recording, started filtering and isolating again, because the names bothered me most. Not just that they were vessel names, not just that the vessels had all been lost, but that the voices were whispering them. Dozens of voices, layered and overlapping, speaking the names of ships that had vanished into these waters. Speaking them as if they knew, as if they remembered, as if they were calling them home. I put on my headphones, adjusted the frequency filters, listened to the whispers repeat their litany of coordinates and dates and names. Outside, the sun dropped toward the horizon. The tower creaked in the wind. The waves hit the rocks with their eternal rhythm. And somewhere in the water 4 miles southeast, moving 15 miles closer every night, something approached that carried voices it shouldn't have. I saved my transcriptions, made backup copies on 2 external drives, organized the fragments by timestamp and recording date. Then I made fresh coffee and settled in to wait. 8 hours until 2:47 a.m. 8 hours until whatever was moving through the water reached my position. I wasn't going to miss it. I spent the next 6 hours at the table, laptop screen glowing in the dim room, methodically searching every ship name I'd managed to isolate from those voices. The satellite connection crawled. Each search query took minutes to load, and half the time the browser timed out before results appeared. I'd restart. Wait. Try again. My coffee went cold in the mug beside me, scum forming on the surface. Pacific Dawn came up first. Disappeared March 14th, 1983. 12 crew members. Last known position was 47.3 degrees north, 124.8 west, less than 30 miles from where I sat. The Coast Guard searched for 11 days, found nothing. Not a life preserver, not a fuel slick, not a single piece of debris. I wrote down the coordinates, the date, the crew count. Stella Marie loaded next, vanished July 9th, 2006. Family of 4 aboard. Parents, 2 daughters aged 8 and 11. They'd been sailing from Seattle to San Francisco. Radio contact ceased abruptly at 1900 hours. Weather conditions were clear. No distress call. The investigation file remained open, listed as unexplained disappearance. I added those details to my notes. Northern Cross took longer to find. The name appeared in a digitized archive from a 1971 newspaper, scanned poorly enough that I had to squint at the pixelated text. Commercial fishing vessel. 6 crew. Lost in a storm. November 2nd, 1971. The article mentioned families demanding further search efforts, accusations that the Coast Guard had given up too quickly. Harvest Moon. 1998. Recreational yacht. 3 people. Disappeared without explanation. Every name I verified matched the pattern. Vessels that had vanished in these waters across 4 decades. Different types: commercial, recreational, fishing boats, sailboats. Different circumstances: storms, clear weather, mechanical failure suspected, no explanation offered. But all gone, all lost somewhere in the Pacific Northwest coastal waters, never found. I kept searching. The Lady Catherine, 2003. Cargo vessel, 9 crew. The Meridian Star, 1968. Research ship, 14 scientists and crew aboard. The names kept appearing in my filtered recordings, and every single one belonged to a ghost. Ships that had sailed into these waters and never returned. My hands shook when I typed, not from cold, from the growing certainty that I was listening to something I shouldn't be hearing, something that existed in a space between what I understood and what made any rational sense. I saved everything, copied the files to both external drives again, made a third backup on the laptop's internal storage, organized the data by date of disappearance, by vessel type, by last known coordinates, built a spreadsheet tracking every detail I could extract. The coordinates bothered me most. When I plotted them on the maritime chart I'd pulled up, they formed a rough corridor along the coast. Not random. Clustered. Like something beneath the water had claimed them all from the same hunting ground. I checked the time. 2200 hours. 4.5 hours until the pattern would reach my position. The voices grew louder. I noticed it first on the second night after I'd identified the ship names. I sat in the equipment room at 2:47 a.m., headphones on, watching the waveforms spike across the monitor. The sound came through hydrophone 9, right on schedule, 15 miles south of the lighthouse. But this time I didn't need to filter the recording to hear the whispers. They came through clearer, sharper. The subsonic rumble still formed the foundation, but layered over it were distinct phonemes, words that resolved into fragments without needing spectral analysis. Coordinates 47.2. Northern Cross, 6 souls. November storm, hull breach. I yanked the headphones off. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The equipment room felt too small, the walls pressing inward. I put the headphones back on. The voices continued, patient and relentless. I recorded everything, saved the file, backed it up. The next night they were louder still. Hydrophone 6, 10 miles south. The subsonic pulse remained, but the whispers rose in volume and clarity. I could distinguish individual speakers now. Different timbres, different cadences. A woman's voice repeating coordinates, a man's voice naming a vessel, another man whispering dates in a monotone. I transcribed what I could. My notes grew into pages of fragments, disjointed phrases that painted incomplete pictures of disasters and disappearances. By the fourth night, hydrophone 4, 5 miles south, I didn't need headphones at all. The sound traveled through the tower itself, a low vibration that resonated in the steel walls, the floor beneath my feet, the chair I sat in. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. The whispers came through the structure, transmitted by water and metal, and something else I couldn't name. I stood at the narrow window in the equipment room, looking south into darkness. The ocean spread black and empty under a moonless sky. No lights, no boats, nothing but water and whatever moved beneath it. The voices whispered names, coordinates, dates, over and over. I counted them. At least 40 distinct speakers, maybe more. They overlapped, created harmonics, built into a chorus that seemed almost purposeful in its repetition. I plotted their trajectory with obsessive precision. The map on the table became covered in pins and penciled lines. Each hydrophone position marked, each night's occurrence connected. The pattern formed a perfect geometric progression northward along the coast, 15 miles per night, arriving at 2:47 a.m. with mechanical regularity. I measured the distances 3 times to be certain, used the chart's scale, verified coordinates, cross-referenced against the hydrophone array specifications from the equipment binder. The math was simple, undeniable. Tonight they'd reach hydrophone 2, 3 miles south. Tomorrow night, hydrophone 1, 2 miles south. The night after that, they'd be here, directly beneath the lighthouse, at 2:47 a.m. I sat at the table, staring at the map, trying to understand what would happen when they arrived. The voices belonged to lost ships, lost people, disasters spanning 40 years. They were moving, drawing closer, whispering their identities and coordinates and the dates they'd vanished. What did they want? What happened when they reached this position? I didn't know. Couldn't know. But my hands shook when I marked the lighthouse's location with a red pin, and the line I'd drawn terminated exactly there. 3 days. I called Hazel at noon on the second day. The satellite phone rang 4 times before switching to a generic voicemail system. No personal greeting, just a mechanical voice instructing me to leave a message. I hung up. Tried again. Voicemail. Hazel, this is Rodney. I need to discuss the anomaly. It's urgent. Call me back. I waited by the phone for an hour. She didn't call. At 1800 hours, I tried again. Voicemail. I left another message, more detailed this time. Explained the pattern, the trajectory, the voices I'd isolated. Kept my tone professional despite the anxiety tightening my throat. No response. The next morning, I called at 0800, voicemail. At noon, voicemail. At 1500, voicemail. At 1800, voicemail. I left messages each time. Started calm, grew more insistent. By the evening call, I was talking too fast, words tumbling over each other as I tried to convey the urgency. Hazel, they're 2 miles south now. Tomorrow night, they'll be here. I need guidance. I need to know what I'm supposed to do. Please, call back. The phone stayed silent. I checked the satellite connection, working fine. Tested the phone by calling the equipment support line listed in the procedures binder. Someone answered on the second ring, verified my location, asked if I needed technical assistance. I said no. Hung up. The phone worked. Hazel just wasn't answering. On the third day, I called at 0600 before she'd normally be in contact. Voicemail. 0800. Voicemail. 1000. Voicemail. Noon. Voicemail. I stopped leaving messages. Just let it ring. Listened to the digital static and the mechanical voice. Hung up. Tried again. 1400. Voicemail. 1600. Voicemail. 1800. Voicemail. 2000. Voicemail. The panic that had been building in my chest since I'd first plotted the trajectory expanded into something larger. Not fear exactly. More like the sensation of standing at the edge of something vast and incomprehensible, knowing I was about to fall and having no way to stop it. Hazel had been my only contact. The only person who knew I was here, who checked in daily, who represented some connection to the world beyond this tower. Now she was gone. Silent. Unreachable. I sat at the table, phone in hand, staring at the map with its red pin marking my position. The voices would arrive in 6 hours. At 2:47 a.m. they'd be directly beneath me, and I'd be alone with whatever they were. I tried the phone one more time at 2200. Voicemail. I set it down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. The tower groaned around me. Waves crashed against the rocks below. The wind picked up, whistling through gaps in the window frame. I sat in the dim room, surrounded by my notes and recordings and the maritime chart covered in pins, and waited for 2:47 a.m. I'd stopped sleeping entirely by then. No point trying anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers layering over each other, coordinates and names and dates weaving together into something that felt almost conscious. So I stayed in the equipment room instead, watching the clock tick toward 02:47, waiting for whatever was coming to arrive. But the waiting got to me, made my hands shake, made my thoughts spiral. I needed something to do, something concrete, something that didn't involve staring at that map with all those colored pins marking the pattern's inexorable northward crawl. So I turned to the equipment itself. I'd been using it for days now, weeks really, but I'd never actually examined it. Not properly. I'd put on the headphones, opened the logging software, tagged sounds according to the classification binder, standard monitoring procedure. But I'd never looked at what the equipment actually did, how it functioned, what it was designed to accomplish beyond passive listening. The main console sat against the eastern wall, a bank of rack-mounted components with LED indicators blinking in steady rhythms. Green lights mostly, a few amber ones indicating active recording channels. I'd glanced at it during Orion's initial walkthrough, but hadn't paid real attention. Just nodded when he'd pointed things out and explained the basics. Now I studied it with the kind of focus I used to apply to research data back when I had a real job, back before the divorce, before I'd needed to escape to a lighthouse 3 miles offshore just to find some goddamn quiet. The top rack held the recording array, 12 channels, one for each hydrophone positioned in a grid pattern around the facility. Below that sat the signal processors, digital converters, and storage drives that captured and archived every sound picked up by the underwater microphones. Standard equipment. Nothing unusual there. But the third rack down caught my attention. A transmitter unit. Heavy duty, judging by the heatsink fins running along its casing, connected to the hydrophone array through a junction box that split the signal paths. I frowned at it, ran my finger along the cables tracing their routes. Hydrophones were supposed to be passive devices, microphones essentially. They picked up sound waves traveling through water and converted them into electrical signals. One-way operation, listening only. This transmitter suggested otherwise. I pulled the procedures binder from the shelf where I'd left it, wedged between the classification guide and the equipment manuals. Flipped through the sections I had already read, monitoring protocols, sound categories, logging procedures, emergency contacts. Then I went deeper, past the pages I'd skimmed during that first day when everything still seemed straightforward and manageable. Found a section labeled System Configuration near the back. The text was dense. Technical specifications, frequency ranges, power output ratings, but buried in the third paragraph, a single sentence made my stomach drop. Active acoustic transmission occurs on a continuous cycle via hydrophones 1, 4, 7, and 10, broadcasting at 18 Hz with 200-watt output directed toward survey zone alpha. I read it again. Then a third time. Active acoustic transmission. The hydrophones weren't just listening. 4 of them were broadcasting, sending signals out into the water on a frequency so low I couldn't hear it without specialized equipment. 18 Hz. Well below the range of human hearing, deep infrasound that could travel for miles through seawater without significant attenuation. I turned back to the console, found the power output meter I'd previously ignored. The needle sat steady at 195 watts, just below the 200 listed in the manual. Constant transmission, exactly as the documentation specified. My hands started shaking again. I pulled up the hydrophone map on the laptop, the one showing all 12 positions in their grid pattern around the lighthouse. Highlighted units 1, 4, 7, and 10. They formed a smaller square within the larger array, positioned at the cardinal points, and they were all aimed inward, toward the center of the grid, toward Survey Zone Alpha. I didn't know what Survey Zone Alpha was. The term hadn't appeared in any of the briefing materials Hazel had provided, but I could guess its location easily enough. The map showed depth contours in addition to hydrophone positions, and there was only one feature that made sense as a survey target: the trench. 2 miles down, directly beneath the lighthouse, a geological fault line where the ocean floor dropped away into crushing darkness. I'd noted it during my first review of the charts, but hadn't thought much about it. Just another piece of topographical data. Now I stared at those depth contours, the lines packed tight together indicating a nearly vertical drop, and felt something cold settle in my chest. The equipment had been broadcasting into that trench, continuously. For how long? I checked the system logs, scrolling back through weeks of automated entries. The transmission had been running since before I'd arrived. Months, probably, maybe longer. The logs only retained 90 days of historical data, and the pattern extended back to the earliest entries. 18 Hz, 200 watts. Aimed down into the deepest part of the trench, where the pressure would crush a human body into paste, and the temperature hovered just above freezing. Calling something. The thought arrived, fully formed, undeniable. I tried to push it away, tried to apply rational analysis, tried to find some other explanation. Research purposes, geological surveying, seismic monitoring. But I'd already heard the voices. I'd already tracked their northward progression, their precise timing, their geometric spacing. I'd already confirmed they were connected to ships that had vanished in these waters over 4 decades. And now I knew the facility had been broadcasting a signal into the depths for months. Drawing something up. My breath came faster, shallow. I stood from the console and paced to the narrow window overlooking black water. The ocean was invisible in the darkness, just a sense of vast emptiness beyond the glass. But I could hear it. The waves hitting the rocks below. The wind whistling through gaps in the tower's structure. And beneath that, if I listened carefully, a faint vibration in the steel floor. Rhythmic, regular, growing stronger each night as the pattern moved closer. The voices weren't just recordings. They weren't electromagnetic interference or compressed radio transmissions, or any of the explanations Hazel had offered. They were something the signal had collected, gathered up from the ships that had gone down in these waters, from the people who drowned, their final words, their coordinates, their names and dates, all of it absorbed and carried by whatever was rising from the trench, responding to the call. I pressed my forehead against the cold window glass. Tried to think. Tried to process what this meant. The research station wasn't studying marine acoustics. It was a beacon. A lighthouse of a different kind. Broadcasting into the deep and guiding something toward the surface. And I'd been operating it. Following the procedures. Maintaining the equipment. Ensuring the transmission continued without interruption. Unknowingly participating in whatever this was. Whatever was coming. Hazel had known. She must have. The way she'd dismissed my reports, insisted the anomalies were just interference, told me to stop fixating and focus on standard documentation. She'd been keeping me in the dark deliberately. Keeping me here, alone, running the equipment that called to something 2 miles down in the crushing black. I checked my watch. 001:15, 92 minutes until 02:47, 92 minutes until the pattern reached the lighthouse, and whatever was carrying those voices arrived directly beneath my position. The realization hit me with physical force, made my knees weak. I needed to leave. Now. Immediately. Before it got here. I crossed to the satellite phone mounted on the wall, grabbed it, started to dial Orion's number for an emergency pickup, then stopped. The boat was 40 minutes away in good conditions. He'd need time to wake up, get to the dock, start the engine, make the crossing. Even if he left immediately, which he wouldn't, not at 01:15 in the morning for someone he barely knew, he couldn't arrive before 02:47. And the ocean was rough tonight. I could hear it in the way the waves hit the tower's foundation. Feel it in the vibration traveling up through the steel. Orion wouldn't come. Not in these conditions. Not in the dark. I was stuck here, alone on a lighthouse 3 miles offshore, operating equipment that had spent months calling something up from the deepest part of the trench, with 90 minutes left before it arrived and no way to escape. The phone slipped from my shaking hands, clattered against the floor. I left it there and returned to the window, staring out at darkness and trying very hard not to think about what I'd done. I ran. Down the spiral stairs, boots clanging on metal, one hand gripping the rail to keep from pitching forward. The tower groaned around me. Wind or structure or something else didn't matter. 83 minutes until 2:47. The boat sat at the dock below, 30 feet of rusted workboat that Orion piloted every 2 weeks. I'd watched him tie it off during supply runs. Engine sputtered but ran. Fuel tank always topped off. I could make it to shore in 40 minutes if the sea cooperated. The living quarters blurred past. I yanked open the steel door at the base of the tower, salt wind hitting my face hard enough to make my eyes water. The concrete platform extended 6 feet from the tower base, waves slamming against the rocks below and sending spray up over the edge. I grabbed the rusted ladder welded to the platform's side and swung myself down toward the dock. The boat floated 15 feet below, tied to iron cleats with frayed rope. Dark water churned between the hull and the rocks. I made it 3 rungs down before I saw the waterline. Too low. Way too low. The boat sat heavy in the water, stern already submerged past the transom, bow tilted up at an angle that turned my stomach cold. I stopped on the ladder, salt spray soaking through my jacket, and stared at the hull. Holes. 4 of them visible from where I hung, each the size of my fist, punched through the fiberglass in a neat line along the starboard side. Water poured in through every opening, steady streams that caught the lighthouse beam when the tower rotated overhead. The boat settled lower as I watched, gunwale dropping toward the surface inch by inch. I climbed down another 2 rungs. Got close enough to see the edges of the holes, not splintered outward from impact, but pushed out. Fiberglass petals bloomed around each puncture, curling toward the open air, Something inside the hull had punched through from the inside out. My hand slipped on the wet metal. I caught myself, boots scraping against the ladder, and looked down at the boat's interior. Dark water filled the hull past the bench seats. The engine cover floated loose, bobbing against the stern. Whatever had made those holes was gone now, or underwater, or waiting. The bow dipped lower. Rope creaked against the cleats. I climbed back up. 79 minutes left. The equipment room felt smaller when I returned. I stood in the doorway, breathing hard, water dripping from my jacket onto the metal floor. The console blinked its steady rhythm. 18 Hz transmission, 200 watts, survey zone alpha. Calling something up from 2 miles down. The satellite phone hung on the wall where I'd left it after the failed call to Orion. I crossed the room and picked up the handset. My fingers shook enough that I had to dial twice, missing buttons the first time. Hazel's number. The one I'd called every day at noon for weeks. The one that went to voicemail yesterday and the day before, and every attempt since I'd started reporting the pattern. The phone rang once. Then a recorded message. The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number and try again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, looked at the handset, put it back and dialed again, slower this time, checking each digit against the contact list in the procedures binder. Same message. Not in service. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the automated voice repeat itself, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not panic this time. Worse than that. The kind of cold that comes when you realize you've been wrong about something fundamental. I hung up. Flipped through the procedures binder to the emergency contacts page. Found the main number for the research station's parent organization, Pacific Northwest Marine Research Consortium. I'd never called it before. Never needed to. Hazel handled everything. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. PNMRC, this is Night Desk. How can I help you? Young voice. Bored. I need to speak with someone about the acoustic monitoring station 3 miles off the coast. The lighthouse. Okay. What's the issue? I need to reach my supervisor, Hazel Espinoza. She's not answering her direct line. Silence on the other end. Then, hold on. Keyboard clicking. I waited, watching the console blink, counting seconds. 68 minutes. Sir, I'm not showing any Hazel Espinoza in our employee directory. She's my supervisor. She calls every day at noon. She reviews my data logs. More typing. What station did you say? The lighthouse. 3 miles offshore. Acoustic monitoring. Let me transfer you to operations. The line clicked. Held. A different voice came on. Older, male, irritated at being woken. This is operations. What's the problem? I explained again. The lighthouse. The monitoring work. Hazel Espinoza. We don't have any active monitoring stations offshore right now, he said. The lighthouse project was shut down 8 months ago. Equipment's still out there, but nobody's staffed. My hand tightened on the phone. I've been here for weeks. Who authorized your deployment? Hazel Espinoza. She hired me. She calls every day. Sir, I'm looking at our personnel database right now. We have no record of anyone named Hazel Espinoza. Never have. The floor tilted under my feet. I sat down hard in the chair, phone still pressed to my ear. The equipment's running, I said. My voice sounded distant. The transmission. Survey Zone Alpha. What transmission? Hydrophones 1, 4, 7, and 10. Broadcasting 18 Hz at 200 watts. It's been running for months. Silence. Then. Those units don't have broadcast capability. They're passive receivers only. I looked at the console. Third rack. Heavy-duty transmitter. cables running to 4 hydrophones, LED showing active output, 200 watts. "It's running right now," I said. "That's not possible. Look, I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing out there, but that station is closed. If you're on site without authorization, you need to leave immediately and contact—" I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered against the wall, dangling by its coiled cord. I sat in the chair and stared at the console. No record of Hazel Espinoza. Never employed by the consortium. The calls every day at noon. Her voice through the static, professional and measured, asking about my data logs and equipment status, and adjustment to isolation. Her irritation when I reported the pattern. Her instructions to focus on standard documentation and stop fixating on anomalies. I'd been alone the entire time, kept in place by a voice that existed only to ensure I completed my task. That I kept the transmission running. That I stayed at the console and logged the sounds and didn't ask too many questions until it was too late to matter. The tower groaned. Wind howled through gaps in the window seals. 63 minutes until 2:47. I stood up, walked to the map still pinned to the wall, covered in colored markers tracking the pattern's northward movement. 15 miles per night, geometric precision. Voices of lost ships and drowned crews whispering coordinates and names and dates. All of it moving toward this exact location. Toward the transmission I'd been maintaining without knowing what it called. My legs gave out. I caught myself on the desk edge, knuckles white against the metal, and understood with perfect, terrible clarity that I'd been manipulated. Trapped. The boat destroyed from inside so I couldn't leave. The phone number disconnected because I didn't need supervision anymore. Just compliance. Just my presence here at this console, keeping the signal active until whatever rose from the trench arrived. I looked at the transmitter, thought about the power switch, the circuit breakers. Thought about the voices I'd heard, layered and whispering, growing louder each night. 61 minutes left. And nowhere to go, but up. I sat at the console watching the clock display count forward, 2:46 and 20 seconds. The headphones rested heavy against my ears, foam padding damp with sweat. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair, that same metal-framed swivel seat I'd occupied for weeks, bolted to the floor so it wouldn't shift in rough seas. 25 seconds. The whispers continued through the headphones, layered and insistent. Pacific Dawn. Stella Marie, Northern Cross, Harvest Moon, Lady Catherine, Meridian Star, coordinates and dates cycling endlessly, voices overlapping until individual words blurred into a constant susurrus that filled my skull. I'd stopped trying to parse them hours ago. Now I just waited. 30 seconds. The tower groaned around me. Wind hammered the narrow windows, rattling the glass in its steel frame. Rain had started 20 minutes prior, drumming against the exterior walls in rhythmic gusts. I could feel the vibration through the floor, through the chair, through the bones of my hands where they clenched the armrests. 40 seconds. My laptop sat open on the desk beside me, screen dark to conserve battery. The map with its colored pins hung on the wall to my left, trajectory lines converging on the lighthouse's position. 15 miles per night for 6 consecutive nights, moving north along the coast in perfect geometric progression. Now it was here. Whatever it was. Whatever I'd been broadcasting to for 3 months without knowing. 50 seconds. I thought about shutting down the transmitter. The power switch sat 6 inches from my right hand. Red toggle beneath a clear plastic guard. Flip it down, and the 18 Hz signal would stop. The 200 watts pumping into Survey Zone Alpha would go silent. Maybe that would change something. Maybe it would make whatever was rising from the trench turn back. Maybe it would make things worse. 55 seconds. My breath came shallow and quick. I forced myself to inhale slowly through my nose, exhale through my mouth. An old technique from therapy sessions after the divorce, when panic attacks had become routine. It didn't help much now. My heart hammered against my ribs, pulse throbbing in my temples loud enough I could hear it beneath the whispers. 2:47. The voices stopped, not faded, not diminished. They cut off mid-syllable with the precision of a thrown switch, leaving absolute silence in the headphones, except for the faint electronic hiss of the open channel. I sat frozen, hands locked on the armrests, waiting for something to fill that sudden void. Then the screaming started. It came through all 12 hydrophones at once, a chorus of raw human agony that slammed into my ears with physical force. I jerked back, hands flying to the headphones, but I couldn't make myself remove them. The screams weren't layered whispers anymore. They were distinct voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, each one shrieking with the full-throated desperation of someone drowning, choking, dying. I recognized words in the chaos. Help. Please. God. No. Names shouted into darkness. Coordinates screamed as final messages. The sounds people make when they know they're going to die and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. My hands shook so badly the headphones slipped sideways. I straightened them, pressed the foam padding tight against my ears even as every instinct told me to rip them off and throw them across the room. The waveforms on the laptop screen spiked red, clipping the upper limits of the recording software. Distortion crackled through the screams, digital artifacts fragmenting the audio into jagged pieces. I looked at the console. All 12 channel indicators blazed solid red. The transmitter continued its steady output, 18 Hz, 200 watts, survey zone alpha. The LED blinked green, normal operation. The screaming didn't stop. I pushed back from the desk, chair wheels scraping against the bolted floor. My legs felt weak when I stood, but I made myself cross to the narrow window on the eastern wall. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the view. I wiped the condensation from the interior with my sleeve and pressed my face close to see outside. The floodlight mounted on the tower's exterior cast a weak cone of illumination across the concrete platform and the water beyond. Waves churned black and violent, whitecaps breaking against the rocks at the lighthouse base. The ruined boat bobbed at the dock, stern submerged, bow pointing skyward at a 45-degree angle. Then the water began to move. Not waves, not current. The entire surface around the lighthouse shifted as if something massive was displacing it from below. The black water bulged upward in a slow, deliberate swell centered maybe 50 feet from the platform. I watched the bulge rise higher, shedding foam and spray, climbing toward the surface with inexorable patience. The screaming in my headphones grew louder. I backed away from the window. My shoulders hit the console, and I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. The tower groaned, a deep metallic sound that resonated through the spiral staircase and the equipment racks. I'd heard that groan before during storms, but this was different. This felt like the tower was reacting to something outside, something pushing against it. I turned back to the window. The water broke. What surfaced wasn't a whale, wasn't a submarine, wasn't anything I had vocabulary to describe. The shape rose from the churning Black Sea in segments, long, pale sections that caught the floodlight and reflected it back with a sick luminescence. Barnacles crusted the surface, thick colonies that looked decades old. Kelp draped across it in curtains, streaming water as the thing continued rising. It was curved, segmented, each section maybe 20 feet long, connected by joints that flexed with obscene fluidity. I counted 3 segments, then 4, then 5 as more of it broke the surface, water cascading off in sheets. The screaming peaked. My eardrums throbbed with the pressure of it, pain lancing through my skull. I clawed the headphones off and let them drop to the floor. Even without them, I could hear the screaming, fainter now but still present, transmitted through the tower's steel bones, vibrating up from the water itself. The thing in the water continued rising. 6 segments. 7. The joints between them bent at angles that made my eyes hurt to follow. Barnacles covered every inch, some as large as dinner plates, and among them I saw other things embedded in the pale flesh. Ropes tangled around one segment, a rusted anchor chain wrapped tight around another, fragments of wood and metal protruding like shrapnel. 8 segments. The uppermost section broke free of the water completely, rising 30 feet above the waves. It tapered to a blunt point, eyeless and featureless except for the barnacles and debris. The whole thing swayed in the wind, kelp streaming from it, water pouring in rivulets down its length. Then it bent. The topmost segment curved downward with deliberate slowness, joints flexing one by one until the blunt tip pointed directly at the lighthouse, directly at the window where I stood, directly at me. The screaming stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the void. No wind, no waves, no voices, just my ragged breathing and the frantic hammering of my heart. The thing held position, motionless in the black water, barnacle-crusted segments gleaming in the floodlight. Frozen. Waiting. I stood at the window, trapped 3 miles offshore in a tower that groaned and shuddered, staring at something massive and pale and impossible that had surfaced from the trench 2 miles below, because I'd spent 3 months broadcasting a signal I didn't understand. The console behind me continued its steady operation. 18 hertz, 200 watts, survey zone alpha. The thing in the water didn't move. Neither did I.